All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, we are doing the tafsir right now. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara. We're still in this ayah, of course. This is Surah Nisa, ayah number 43. And of course, with Surah Nisa, ayah number 43, we did actually mention a couple things. We did mention that this ayah is actually related to, of course, I would say the start of this one, this ayah right here, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. So basically laying out the foundations of how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Give us some details. We're not going to go over this again. But then, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. How do we actually make the connection and the relationship between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So we talked about لا تقربوا الصلاة, don't approach or at least engage in prayer when you are in a state of sukur, when you're in a state of intoxication. And we talked about the intoxication and is it sleep, is it intoxication? And of course, we talked about حتى تعلموا ما تقولون, in where so that you would be able and capable of knowing what you are saying. And we talked about, is this only relating to prayer, or what if a person were to divorce while they're in a state of intoxication? Would that actually make their divorce, or at least their behavior, considered as they're held accountable for it or not? We went into that exciting debate. All right, and right now, inshallah, we're going to continue. And وَلَا جُنُبًا إِلَّا عَابِرِي سَبِيلٍ, and not in a state of janaba. And we talked about the state of janaba, and we said it's really, the state of janaba is when a person, of course, that has reached the age of puberty, because a person that didn't reach the age of puberty cannot whatsoever develop or even produce the different substances that get the person in a state of janaba. That would only happen after the age of puberty, period. Okay, only, whether it's male or female, only when they reach the age of puberty can they actually develop the different secretions, or even the different substances that basically mark that the person had basically completed their development, at least their physical development in of course their genitalia, and of course their reproduction system. So here the word junuban basically means that when the person reaches the climax of whether the climax that they had reached it, whether through wet dreams or whether it was through different interactions, let's just leave it at that. إلا عابري سبيل, إلا عابري سبيل, unless they were passing by. So scholars actually had differences of opinions on a number of different things about this. Let's just first decipher some of the things that they were saying. Okay, so ولا جنوبا إلا عابري سبيل. The only times that you would pass by the masjid if you were in a state of janaba is only if you were to pass by. The word abir actually means to go through something. Okay, abir sabil, you're just walking by, unless you would make a complete shower. So here's the thing. The scholars actually said there were what makes a person in a state of janaba. They discussed that one. We're going to discuss a number of different things. You could see a number of different points that I actually wanted to highlight in order to discuss. So let's say, so right there, they were talking about, number one, is that does there have to be an actual penetration, or can there be reaching the climax without an actual penetration? So whether a penetration did happen or not, whether the actual penetration happened or not, at the end of the day, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, إِنَّمَا الْمَاءُ مِنَ الْمَاءِ, right? So and at the end of the day, if an actual, let's call it basically the secretion of the actual substance that marks the final climax of reaching the sexual climax, that's what would actually make ghusl or taking a shower as obligatory. That's what would make it obligatory. The actual secretion that marks the final climax for that, let's call it the excitement of it. All right, and that's where the Prophet ﷺ basically points out. Let's see this hadith in al-Bukhari. So وفي البخاري عن أبي بن كعب أنه قال يا رسول الله إذا جمع رجل المرأة فلم ينزل قال يغسل ما مس المرأة من ثم يتوضأ ويصلي قال أبو عبد الله الغسل أحوط وذلك الآخر. Now here's one thing. There is a hadith. I want you to look at this. So this hadith is basically narrated by al-Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, if a man were to approach a woman, or at least right there, we're talking about jama'ah to actually mean an actual intimacy, whether and of course, if they were not to basically reach the climax, here this quote said that he would basically only wash the area that got near, in other words, that basically touched the woman, and then they would make wudu and actually pray. In other words, they didn't reach the climax. This would be just speaking about this. This is not necessarily an issue of reaching the climax. Now, here's one thing. Abu Abdullah, right there in Bukhari. Now, I'm trying to get to a point, so pay attention to this one. Okay, Abu Abdullah, who is al-Bukhari, he actually said al-ghuslu ahwat. To actually make a complete shower is really staying on the safe side. But here's another hadith. Here, listen to this one. This is a very important thing. Imam Muslim, he basically quoted this. There's a hadith, Abu al-Ala ibn al-Shikhir, that the Prophet ﷺ, look at this hadith, okay, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ينسخ حديثه بعضه بعضا كما ينسخ القرآن بعضه بعضا. So what did he say? So Imam Muslim basically had quoted that there are certain things that the Prophet ﷺ might have actually later said, and that the words that the Prophet ﷺ said later would abrogate the words that were said previously. And this is important. So what he was trying to say was this was true at one point in history, in one point when the Prophet ﷺ, in the early times of Islam, but later the Prophet ﷺ had actually mentioned if a penetration were to happen, whether an actual climax did happen for the woman or the man, whether it did happen, whether the secretion did happen or not, that at the end of the day, just with the actual penetration, that actually requires ghusl. So in that situation, you would see that this portion of it was actually abrogated by another hadith. Let's see what here al-Qurtubi said. قلت على هذا جماعة العلماء من الصحابة والتابعين وفقهاء الأمصار. So here al-Qurtubi said, well, this is what all the Sahaba, all the later generations after the Sahaba that met the Sahaba, they're called tabi'een, and even the different scholars, he said that's what they all agreed on, that even if there was no actual climax in secretion, at least, or you understand what I'm talking about, that just the actual touching, or this just the actual penetration itself, and we're talking about khitanain to actually mean the two, let's call it the two areas that you know what I'm talking about. In that situation, they would be basically required to make ghusl. All right, and he said that the differences of opinions between the Sahaba before, he said raja'u fih, they all basically had changed their fatwa in regards to it after they had heard Sayyida Aisha. Here the Prophet ﷺ say, إذا جلس بين شعابها الأربع ومس الختان الختان فقد وجب الغسل. this is a rather graphic, I would say, graphic description right there. In other words, if basically is in between the four different areas where they're talking about the different parts of the body, and the two al-khitan, basically al-khitan is basically the area of circumcision. The area of circumcision. If the two areas of circumcision touch, and therefore we're talking about, of course, penetration, then that would require al-ghusl. So this is to say that Aisha basically brought an end to any dispute and any misunderstanding that the Sahaba might have had, and that's why they say that Aisha basically, as being the closest person to the Prophet ﷺ, and especially in regards to the private matters, she basically said, well, let me tell you what the Prophet ﷺ said. There's one side that basically ended the whole dispute. And look at this. This is a Sayyidah Aisha right there, really being at the top to actually end even the dispute amongst the Sahaba. Let's see here, Ibn al-Qassar, look at see, this is one of the scholars of al-Malikiyya. He died 397 Hijriya. All right, what did he say? So he basically said, أجمع التابعون ومن بعدهم بعد خلاف من قبلهم على الأخذ بحديث إذا التقى الختان. Ibn al-Qassar, he said, the tabi'in and even the scholars that could come after them, they all had unanimously later agreed, even though there was a dispute before that amongst them, that the hadith إذا التقى الختانان, that basically would mean that this hadith ended the dispute and brought in a whole new unanimously agreed upon between them, that opinion in where even if an actual secretion did not happen, just with the penetration happening, that in itself is actually requiring ghusl on its own. قال القاضي عياض. Let's tell you about a story. القاضي عياض. القاضي عياض, his father wanted, when he was a young child, wanted him to become a great scholar. So his father would basically always just make sure that his son Iyad is eating halal every single time. He would come back home. Did Iyad eat only halal? Yes, he did. Did always asking the same question. One day, Iyad was just a toddler. One day, the kids, they basically decided, of course, in the neighborhood, we're going to take Iyad with us to play. So they took Iyad to play, but then Iyad, they were playing, but then Iyad, little toddler, started crying. The kids didn't want to go through the fuss of taking Iyad back home, so they basically just had him basically get any food from the neighborhood. So Iyad ate from some nearby neighborhood. Iyad comes back with the kids. Father comes back and he says, did Iyad eat everything halal today? And she said, well, yes, but the kids actually took him out to play. And they came back and he was fully fed. Where did he feed from? Well, there was a lady that was really, I guess, feeling sad that Iyad was crying. So she decided to, by herself, to actually nurse Iyad. It was basically a complete full nursing. I know you would never see anybody do that in our times, but this is what happened during their times. They probably thought it was doing somebody a favor. So she did him a favor, I guess, and but well, not according to the father. The father felt, what if she wasn't actually fed halal? What if he's not fed halal? So what he does is that dad puts his fingers inside Iyad's mouth and makes him vomit everything that he had actually been nursed. He throws up everything, but a little bit still remains in basically in his body that was digested. So that's
So,
when
so what is that word? Janaba?
what?
Janaba. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You see
Janaba
it?
ila janab.
What I
Yeah.
do? You mean here?
Yeah, I'm looking at what you you
Yes.
highlighted. Maybe I'm at the wrong place. It's so
No.
small, you know.
Oh, okay. No, I was explaining it, Nora. I was explaining it.
Oh, sorry. I was just learning the Arabic. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So Al-Qadi Iyad, every time later, of course, he became one of the great Maliki scholars, and every time he would go into, I guess, a moment where he can't remember the words or probably confusing words or etc. He would say, "This is the remaining of that nursing that my father basically did not manage to get out." Okay, so this is al-Iyad. Let's see what he had actually said. He said, لا نعلم أحدا قال بعد خلاف الصحابة إلا ما حكي عن الأعمش ثم بعده داود الأصبهاني. He said, we don't know any other dispute or any other differences of opinions after the dispute that the Sahaba had in regard to this matter, except what was actually mentioned on Al-A'mash. Al-A'mash was named that name because he had albino. Okay, so Al-A'mash basically means like an albino. That's what he was known for. He hated anybody calling him that way, but until now, we basically just know him by that name. Okay, and you could see that all of that, the hadith when it said al-ma'u min al-ma', that basically if the water, the secretion happens from the woman, and the secretion happens from the man, that's what basically used to be, that's what would basically require ghusl. But you could see that when they had the differences of opinions, the Sayyidah Aysha said, well, no, whether secretion did actually happen or whether reaching the climax did happen or not, it doesn't matter. As long as there was penetration, that requires ghusl on both sides, the man and the woman. And you could see that Ibn Abbas, he basically said that, no, this junuban right there could also include wet dream, and therefore that the wet dream would basically be putting in the same situation. So whether an actual penetration or intimacy did happen or not. Let's say إلا عابري سبيل. عابري سبيل, when you say عبرت الطريق, I passed by the road, that actually means you basically went from one side to the other. So to say you went from one side to the other, basically, in other words, when you enter the masjid, even if you are in a state of not tahara, or at least this type of level of non-tahara, which is major impurity, in that situation, the only time that you could pass by the masjid is if you were to be passing by. Now, here's one thing. Some scholars actually said, well, abiri sabil is a metaphor, and it's not to pass by, literally pass by the masjid. They said this is a metaphor, and this is talking about a person that is traveling, and not a person that is passing by the masjid to get a keys, or probably, I don't know, to get their
That's what I thought. But anyway.
Exactly. Look at that. So look at that. So you could see you thought exactly like Ibn Abbas, you thought exactly like Ali, you thought exactly like Mujahid and Al-Hakam. Those are all great scholars. Ibn Jubayr, Ibn Abbas is a Sahabi. Ali ibn Abi Talib is a Sahabi. Ibn Jubayr, he died 95 Hijriya. Well, he was actually assassinated. Well, he was executed by Al-Hajjaj. Mujahid, I believe 110 Hijriya. Al-Hakam, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 113 Hijriya died. Abir Sabi, they said, well, that's actually the person on a journey. And he said, those people, they shouldn't be approaching Salah. And when they're, so this is not to say if a person is on a journey, they shouldn't go into the masjid. No, this is actually talking about if a person is in a state of Janaba, they couldn't take a shower and they needed to pass by. Like, for example, which Heathrow Airport, the airport in Amsterdam, airport in Qatar. I think I've been to so many airports that now I can tell you which ones actually have masjids in them. Qatar has Aliyah Airport in Jordan, Heathrow, and we said Amsterdam. Those actually have a masjid in them. So all of these, they have masajid in them. At least those are the ones that I know of. Oh, uh, what's it called? The airport in Turkey, airport in Malaysia, there are masajid there. So I know that for sure. Okay, well, most Islamic countries do, but I guess in London, Heathrow, I know it has a really nice prayer area. But I think the best one is the one in Amsterdam. The one in Amsterdam, right across from the prayer area, there's actually a shower area, which actually makes applying this portion of the ayah easier, because anyways, right across the hall from the prayer area in Amsterdam, they actually have a beautiful shower area where you could just, take a hot, beautiful shower. And there's a women area and there's a men area. So that actually makes applying this ayah easier. But let's just assume you didn't actually have a shower area and you needed to pass by and you needed to pray. Okay, so in that situation, you can make tayammum. And you can pass by the masjid as well. Okay, so even if you are in a state of janaba, you can actually do that. And you could see right there for the musafir, they could just make tayammum even if they didn't have access to taking a shower. All right, so this is just to make it easy. Ibn al-Mundhir, let's see what Ibn al-Mundhir, he basically said that ashab al-ra'i, when you look at the word ashab al-ra'i, and this is for the intro to fiqh class, I wish that everyone was here. Ashab al-ra'i, although some might actually think of it as a derogatory word or a derogatory description, it really isn't. Okay, so ashab al-ra'i, this doesn't mean that they were giving and making fiqh based on their own personal whim, but they were called ashab al-ra'i because they had, yes, they would go back to the resources, but they also had, let's call it their intellect play a very important role in describing or in interpreting the text. And the reason for that is that they didn't actually consider that we would simply just reject a weak hadith. They considered that, no, we can look into the weak hadith, and especially that they didn't have access. Now, remind you, Abu Hanifa actually died he died 150-year Hijriya. He died 150-year Hijriya, which actually means he did not have access to what al-Bukhari had managed to compile, because al-Bukhari died 256 Hijriya, Imam Muslim died 260 Hijriya. So you could say that he didn't actually have access to the hadith that later, let's call it the revolution of hadith, had actually happened in the 3rd century. So therefore, Abu Hanifa didn't actually have these resources. Not that he didn't have any hadith resources, but he didn't have that compilation at hand. So that's why they used a lot of ra'i.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so they used a lot. Yeah, it's really interesting. So they used a lot of, not opinion per se, but they used and let that ijtihad generate a lot of interpretation and a lot of deep interpretation and deep sorry everyone, just give me a second.
How is everybody doing? Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, she's gonna be right back, inshallah. Do you know, does anybody know Arabic in here?
Not really. So,
Oh, not really? Okay. Anybody else? 'Cause I was just curious about what one of the words meant.
Sorry about that, everyone. All right, so the reason why they were called Ashab al-Ra'i is, like I said, is because they really used a lot of ijtihad. And here's one thing, is that they were called Ashab al-Ra'i, but you know, it was really misunderstood by many, thinking that they were putting in their own interpretation, their own ideas above text, which is very wrong. This is absolutely wrong. Definitely, even Abu Hanifa had actually said, إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. If the hadith was proven to be authentic, then that's my madhab. We're not going to consider our own opinion beyond text. Text takes the precedence over any opinion, over any interpretation. You see what I'm saying? Now, here's one thing, is that some scholars did actually consider that if person in a state of janaba, they can enter the masjid even if they're in a state of janaba, and they basically said, well, they would just do tayammum, all right? And they basically said, well, here's evidence. The Prophet ﷺ said,
Which scholars said that? Because I remember you said that before, but which
right.
scholars?
So there, some scholars, some of the Hanafi scholars, and
Oh,
they said,
Hanafi. Okay.
right. So they said, well, al-mu'min laysa binajis. The Prophet ﷺ actually said that a believer is not impure. And they said, well, this hadith is actually narrated by Sahih Muslim right there from Sahih Muslim. Here's the hadith number. Hadith al-Bukhari is actually in Ahmad. And they said, well, this basically gives a general statement that this believer, you cannot consider them as impure. So how did you actually understand that? Understand this ayah then? Well, they said, well, that would actually mean that, well, that when they're passing by, but in general, they can actually, like, they can pass by, and it's, you know, if they want to do their salah, they should actually do the ghusl. Let's see what Ibn Abbas and Ibn Mas'ud and all of that, they said, well, this is actually meaning that if they're just passing by, that's when it's okay not to have ghusl if they're just passing by. But if they want to stay in the masjid, well, that's when they need to make their ghusl, or at least do according to some scholars. They basically said, well, they could make tayammum, or according to Ahmad and Ishaq, they said, well, if they needed to pass by, they could at least do wudu. All right, if they wanted to stay in the masjid, listen to a dars or needed to go somewhere for a meeting, then they could stay, at least make wudu if they needed to stay, and even if they were in a state of janaba. All right, now, of course, during our times, it's not an issue, because I mean, it only takes 2 minutes to actually, you know, make a complete shower. Just turn on the water and it's really easy. But in their times, that wasn't actually that easy to do, because you had to combine the wood, you had to put in put in some water, you had to wait till it gets hot, and you have to
Oh, yeah, because they didn't have hot water.
because they didn't have hot water. So to us, you're thinking like, oh, is it that hard to actually just go under the shower for 2 minutes and that's it? Well, for you, it's 2 minutes. For them, that was easy. That was almost like 2 hours or an hour and a half. You needed to get the wood, you needed to heat it up, you needed to make the fire. All of that was a lot of work. That was a lot of work. But right now, thank God, you only get 2 minutes, and that's basically it. So not hard. Let's see, that question, I mean, is probably not as frequent, but here's a very important thing. Can a woman during the state of a period enter the masjid? Now that's a critical question. Let's look at this one. Ready for this one? This is a very critical one. Sisters, please pay attention to this one.
I was
Because-
waiting for this one.
Waiting for this one. Let's look at this one. Let's look at this hadith. Ready? Let's look at this hadith. This hadith, okay, was narrated, you could see, Abu Dawood, let's look at it, right there, في سننه, جسرة بنت دجاجة. That she had said, سمعت عائشة رضي الله عنها تقول جاء رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ووجوه بيت أصحابه شارعة في المسجد فقال وجهوا هذه البيوت عن المسجد ثم دخل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولم يصنع القوم شيئا رجاء أن تنزل لهم رخصة فخرج إليهم وجهوا هذه البيوت عن المسجد فإني لا أحل المسجد لحائض ولا جنوب. Okay, what happened? So I'm going to quote it. The Prophet ﷺ had actually come when the chambers or the houses for the Sahaba were actually really open, and it was like an easy access from the masjid to their houses. And it was like, you know, it was really becoming like it was public transportation for everybody. They wanted to pass by the masjid, they wanted to go to their houses, they would pass by the masjid and go to their house, and so forth. Now, the Prophet ﷺ then said, well, you know, what do you, masjid? You know, your entrances should be from a different side from the masjid. We can't have the masjid be a place like it's a hallway. We can't have the masjid become like a hallway. So the Prophet ﷺ came in and no one did anything. They were wondering, was like, maybe something else was going to be, because they're used to their houses be and have and share the same entrances with the masjid. So the Prophet ﷺ said that they should turn their entrances away from the masjid. And he said, for I do not permit this masjid, not to a woman that is on a state of a period and not in a state of janaba, which we explained the state of janaba in just a little bit while ago. Now, here's the thing. The question is this hadith sahih or not? If it's hadith sahih, that's it. This is clear. There's no doubt about it. Let's go further. Don't worry, we're going to get there. Let's see this hadith in Sahih Muslim. لا تبقين في المسجد خوخة إلا خوخة أبي بكر. That no one's room, or at least door or entrance, would be basically a main entrance that it would share with the masjid premise, except the khawkhat Abu Bakr, basically only Abu Bakr's entrance would basically be shared with the masjid. So here's the thing. What I actually want to get to is really what we as women are concerned about. Is this hadith really sahih or not? Well, you know, it's quite sad that I've seen a number of different people, a number of different scholars deny that there was any dispute regarding this hadith's authenticity. And I would like to hear my shaykh, and this is really my shaykh, this is not me, you know, saying this is actually my professor right here, okay? This is my professor, Hussam ad-Din Afana. He's actually the most professor that taught me fiqh. This is my professor right there. Maybe I can get a bigger picture of him, okay? So this is my professor, and man, he was not somebody to mess with, definitely not somebody to mess with, all right? And what we're gonna do, let's see, and of course you could see, my professor was actually doing this beautiful study. And by the way, that professor, he has 8 daughters, okay? 8 daughters, one of them actually died of cancer, Allah yarhamha. But anyhow, he basically did a beautiful study in regards, it wasn't just him, It wasn't just him. This isn't a new study where all of a sudden it's like I discovered something that no one discovered before. Let's look into this. So some scholars actually, he said, some scholars that actually went into preventing women that are on their menses from entering the masjid, and they basically said, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara." So basically quoted this ayah that we are working on, this ayah right here, and he said the quotation in regards to this ayah where they said, well, this is actually equal to the person in a state of janaba based on that hadith, which is this hadith. لا أحل المسجد لحائض ولا جنوب. You could see was narrated Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah, but he said وفي سنده كلام كثير. He said, well, actually the chain of narration has a lot of dispute in that regard. And of course, some scholars, they basically considered that women during the state of their period, that they can actually enter the masjid. Who said that? Well, in Imam Ahmad, in one of the opinions, and even al-Muzani, who's actually Shafi'i madhab, and that was also narrated by Abu Dawood, Imam Dawood, and Ibn Hazm al-Zahriyan. Of course, these are two different scholars. Imam Dawood and even Ibn Hazm, they both said that. So how many scholars do we have so far? Did he mention? Imam Ahmad, we've got al-Muzani, we've got Dawood, we've got Ibn Hazm. Those are four. Let's see Imam Ahmad, and what evidence did he use and what did he say? So look at this. This is a book called Al-Insaf fi Ma'rifat al-Rajih min al-Khilaf. It's almost 12-volume book. And he basically said in one of the narrations upon Imam Ahmad, that if a woman were to actually make wudu, or at least if she were to make sure that she wasn't going to contaminate the masjid, that she can enter the masjid for a halaqah, for teaching a class, or probably joining in learning. All right. And this was not only mentioned by previous scholars, but that was also what al-Albani himself in the book Tamam al-Minna, in Tamam al-Minna, and this is the page number, he also had chosen this opinion as well.
So wait. So with the most of the people talking about that hadith, were they Hanafi?
Hold on, we're gonna get to it, Noura. Okay, so in here he basically said, well, this is his, at least my professor's chosen opinion, and he says in the reason and the evidence, the evidence to prove that, he said, number one is that there is no dalil, there is no evidence to prove that you can, hold on. He said, number one is that my laptop all of a sudden froze. Are you all with me here?
We're here.
Okay, good. My laptop just froze. Hold on. I don't know why. Come on, laptop, don't do that to me. Let's go like that. Okay, here we go.
Shame on that laptop.
I know. So number one, he said, because generally, if you want to consider something as haram, you really have to have a dalil sahih sarih. What does that mean? So there are two types. You can have an authentic evidence, but sometimes the wording is not straightforward, in where the wording itself can contain some ambiguity to be really clear to prohibit or to at least permit. So in that situation, he said, well, we don't actually have an authentic hadith that says that women could not enter the masjid when they're in a state of a period. Well, let's see what Imam Nawawi, who's actually Shafi'i, and he said, وأحسن ما يوجه به هذا المذهب أن الأصل عدم التحريم وليس لمن حرم دليل صحيح صريح. Look at this. Imam Nawawi, he said, what you could say, أحسن ما يوجه به هذا المذهب أن الأصل, in general, what actually acts as what stands as the proper madhab, or the proper, at least opinion for a certain school, is that everything, that everything is supposed to be not considered as prohibited, and whoever had prohibited does not actually have a standing sound / authentic evidence that is straightforward and clear in its wording. In that situation, basically, leaving it as really not having sound evidence. Let's see. الألباني said والقول عندنا في هذه المسألة من ناحية الفقهية كالقول في مس القرآن من الجنب للبراءة الأصلية وعدم وجود ما ينهض على التحريم وبه قال الإمام أحمد. الإمام الألباني, he said, in regarding this matter, it from the fiqh standpoint is exactly the same ruling as holding the Quran. So whether holding the Quran due to janaba or even reading the Quran while on the period or entering the masjid, he said there's no sound evidence to prove that it's actually haram. And he said, as for the hadith, that I do not permit the masjid to a person in a state of janaba or a person or a woman that is in a state of a menses, he said scholars of hadith actually had differences of opinions in regarding that hadith because of a certain person. Let's say, look at that. A certain person, his name is Aflat ibn Khalifa, and he was narrating on Jasra bint Dijaja, and he said, well, they both are actually not authentic narrators. And he said this was actually mentioned by a scholar. His name is al-Khattabi, al-Bayhaqi, Abd al-Haq al-Ishbili, and Ibn Hazm. So how many scholars is that? Let's see. Al-Khattabi is a great scholar that actually had a huge, well, actually it's in 5 volumes, but it's a explaining hadith, Sunan Abi Dawood. Al-Bayhaqi, he actually has a whole Sunan al-Bayhaqi, which is almost in 12, 13 volumes. Abd al-Haq al-Ishbili is basically a Maliki scholar. Ibn Hazm is actually known. Let's see what Imam al-Baghawi said. Imam al-Baghawi, in a very, very important mufassir, he basically said, وَجَوَّزَ أحمد والمزني المكث فيه وضعف أحمد الحديث. He said, and Imam Ahmad and al-Muzani, this is Imam al-Baghawi quoting, he said they had actually permitted staying in the masjid, and they regarded that hadith, which is the hadith that we were quoting, لا أحل المسجد لحائض ولا جنوب. He said that that hadith was actually regarded as not authentic because of Aflat ibn Khalifa, who's actually an ambiguous, and in other words, basically a narrator that we don't really know much about. And he said that the hadith, Abiri Sabil, he said that was, he regarded that it was actually talking about those that were on a journey going through a state of janaba, that they would basically do tayammum and they would pray at the masjid, which basically was quoted about Ibn Abbas. And you could see here, Ibn Haqq al-Ishbili, he said that hadith is not proven to be authentic. And Ibn Hazm, he basically said that hadith is batil. He said, well, here, my professor, he was basically, well, he was like exaggerated in saying it's batil, because batil would mean it's completely void. In other words, it contradicts everything in that was mentioned in other texts. At the end of the day, he said, in these two ahadith, you could see that they're actually weak, and therefore Imam al-Nawawi, he actually said, as for regarding touching the Mus'haf, touching the Quran, and even entering the masjid, and mentioned these ahadith, and he said, well, you could say right there that these ahadith are actually not authentic. Let's see, even Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, who's basically a scholar that basically did Fath al-Bari, which is in almost well, it depends on which tab'a and which printout you're talking about, but it's almost 24 volumes in some copies, okay, and would be in 20 volumes, but at the end of the day, is that it's basically the most important book. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he's one of the most important scholars of hadith, and he said, Aflat ibn Khalifa, he said, Majhul al-Hal. Aflat ibn Khalifa was actually the main narrator here for that hadith. He said, Majhul al-Hal, we don't know much about him. And mind you, it-talkhis, well, this is actually a typo. It's supposed to be Talkhis al-Habir, not Takhlis al-Habir. Talkhis al-Habir, this is a typo. Talkhis al-Habir, you could say, is actually one of the books of hadith. And this one is actually in 5 volumes, but Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he basically Taqrib al-Tahdhib and Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, all of those, they're huge volumes in just about the narrators of hadith. If Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar said he was majhul al-hal, you can't go far. Majhul al-hal actually means this narrator for that hadith is basically basically an anonymous person. We don't know who that is. So to base our deen, we cannot base our deen on somebody that we do not know. Let's see, in here al-Khattabi, who was the scholar that I told you earlier, that basically is a scholar of hadith and did Sunan Abi Dawud. He said, وَضَعَفُوا هَذَا الْحَدِيث. Why is it important to actually say that he was basically giving the explanation for Sunan Abi Dawud? Because that hadith isn't Sunan Abi Dawud anyways. So you cannot find anybody going to be more knowledgeable about Sunan Abi Dawud than al-Khattabi, right there. And he said, ضعفوا هذا الحديث وقالوا أفلت راويه مجهول ولا يصح الاحتجاج به. He said, well, they basically said that this hadith is not authentic and that rawihi majhul, and that the narrator is basically an anonymous narrator, and therefore we cannot use that hadith in order to basically bring it as an evidence to prove and prevent women from entering the masjid. You could say right there, let's see Imam al-Bukhari. Imam al-Bukhari, of course, had mentioned that Jisra, that she had basically and that she had ajaib. You know, there are so many different things that she had said were basically not quite known to other more important narrators. And you could see this was actually radio. And he said, اعتبر كثير من العلماء كلام البخاري حدث تضعيفا للحديث. Imam al-Bukhari himself basically said, well, she, that female Jisra bint Dijaja, that she basically according to al-Bukhari, that he said that she actually had some problems and some issues with some of her narrations. And who is saying that? That's al-Bukhari. Even though you could say right there, you know, this quote from al-Bukhari is a way to show that this hadith is containing not only a problem, but it's basically to show that he's disagreeing that this hadith is actually authentic. Let's see. And Ibn Hazm, he basically said, وَهَذَا كُلُّهُ بَاطِلٌ أَمَّا أَفْلَتْ فَغَيْرُ مَشْهُورٌ وَلَا مَعْرُوفٌ بِالثِّقَةِ. Ibn Hazm, he basically said, hey, Aflat is not even known, and we don't even know if he's basically a person that we can take his hadith or not, and so forth. And you know, this is not me making this up, all right? And he said, and what actually supports that it's permissible for a woman during the state of period to enter the masjid is in the generalization of the hadith, quote, that is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ said, al-Muslimu la yanjus. A Muslim does not become impure. In other words, you don't become impure. The period itself, the period itself, the actual bleeding itself, that's what's impure, not the person himself. And he said, and what also supports this is that if a kafir can enter the masjid, a kafir can enter the masjid.
Oh my gosh, that's cool.
Exactly. If a kafir can enter the masjid, and even if it's a female kafir, if a woman wanted to make her shahada, are we going to say we can't have you enter the masjid because you're on your period, you're going to have to wait? Of course not. We're going to tell her, come on in, do your shahada. Let's see another evidence. He said, well, we've got a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim that there was a black woman. And remember, they used to describe people, this is not to, you know, in any way to be derogatory or be racist, but this is actually describing a feature. Okay.
Yeah, because there were white slaves too, you know.
Of course, there were white slaves. So this is not to be whatsoever. It's not like today where if you describe somebody a black, that means you're being racist. But this was a description that they would give, you know, just like would say somebody that's tall. Does that mean you're being, you know, somehow connecting or calling somebody that's short as inferior? No, this is a descriptive and not necessarily anything derogatory. Anyhow, they said, well, there was a woman, and this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim, a black woman that had a place that she would stay in the masjid, the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. And then Bukhari actually said bab, and he labeled it. Why is that important? Al-Bukhari said, Babu nawmul mar'ati fil masjid. Why is that important? So Al-Bukhari, they said, Fiqh al-Bukhari fi tarajimah. al-Bukhari, if you wanted to know his fiqh, it would basically be in the labeling of the chapter. So he would label the chapter, and that's basically to tell you that a woman can sleep in the masjid. Certainly. Let's see. And then he basically quoted, that is al-Bukhari, quoted the hadith of Sayyidah Aysha, that there was a woman from that was basically sleeping in the masjid, and she would basically come to Sayyidah Aysha and actually learn from Sayyidah Aysha. Let's see what Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar actually says about this hadith. He said, in the khiba, basically an area which basically kind of like a small room within the masjid. You could see this is in Fath al-Bari right there. Ibn Hazm said, well, what we actually can derive from this hadith is that this woman was actually living in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and women would get a period, and the Prophet ﷺ did not prevent her from entering the masjid, did not even tell her not to go in it, did not even prevent her, and it was basically leaving it that it is permissible to be at the masjid. And the Prophet ﷺ, in the general words, he said all the earth was basically a masjid. And therefore, he said, if all the earth is a masjid, then they could basically be within the masjid as well. And they cannot basically somehow not enter the masjid, even when they have their period. So this is just a quote. And he basically said, as my professor, he said, and to summarize the whole issue is that it is permissible for a woman during her period to enter the masjid to seek ilm if she were to be sure that she's not going to contaminate the masjid, because it would be very urgent and of course a necessity for women to actually come inside the masjid to learn their deen. And even though he said, I would, وإن كنت أفضل أن تكون دروس العلم للنساء في مرافق ملحقة بالمسجد, even though he thinks it's basically better for women's classes to be in areas that are, kind of like part of the masjid, but not necessarily in the masjid, kind of like in Masjid al-Aqsa. He was talking about, there are certain areas.
Would that also include listening to the khutbah because you're learning from the khutbah?
So yes, but at the same time, the khutbah for Salat al-Jum'ah is a little tricky.
Oh, that's different.
Salat al-Jum'ah is a little tricky because if you're not going to be praying, unless there was space, okay? But if you're not going to be praying and, the space is small, especially for Salat al-Jum'ah, right? So you want to allow
Okay, so the space is the issue.
The space is the issue. It's not whether you are allowed to enter or not. It's the issue of, right, give chains the space.
Okay.
Right. So I hope, this was probably the most detailed time that I actually discussed this topic. I hope it's clear.
Yeah, that was very detailed, mashallah.
It was very detailed. It's really sad that at many times, so hopefully, Noura, we can actually make that into a short video, because this is a very common question. It's really sad that
Inshallah.
you had some scholars.
I just thought you needed to slow down just a little bit.
Okay. It's really sad that we have some scholars that actually said that whoever gave this fatwa was somehow influenced by the West and trying to impress the West. There was Ibn Hazm wasn't trying to impress the West. Neither was Ahmed. Neither was al-Muzani. It's like, oh yeah, they somehow wanted to impress the West, so let's call this hadith da'if. It's like, are you serious, people? That's not respecting the ulama. That's not respecting the ulama. That's not respecting the ulama. That's not how we, this type of ad hominem, in where we're going to be accusing different scholars that we probably might have disagreed with them on a certain fatwa, but it doesn't mean that we would go into this ad hominem and start attacking their intention and accusing them of somehow wanting to impress the West.
I have a question. Is everyone muted, or are they able to unmute themselves if they have any questions or anything?
So, this is, right here, the sister is saying, my sister-in-law asked me the other day because she went to the halaqah. So this is just, inshallah, hopefully we can actually use this video and I guess, cut this portion of it because it's a very common question. It's really sad that, I know that the majority of scholars do disagree with this, with this, with this fatwa, but I thought it was really important to quote. I do regard that as preponderant, not because my professor said it, certainly not, but simply because of the evidence that I feel are basically strong evidence. I feel that there's strong evidence because if you want to regard something as da'if or sahih, or you want to depend on a fatwa, it has to actually stand on sound evidence. And if this is something that was happening to the women, I mean, every 21 to 28 days, most of the women were getting periods. Why do we only have this hadith? Why not even authentic?
Subhanallah.
And this, for sure, all the women were getting periods unless they were all sick.
And not just that, but it really just shows us like that you can't just take one hadith and base a fatwa on just one hadith,
Well, you can actually base a fatwa.
I mean,
on
like you have to consider like the situation, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, you can base a fatwa on one hadith, but it would have to be an authentic hadith.
Okay.
It would have to be an authentic hadith. But if this hadith is not authentic, and we know that the situation tatakarrar, it happens frequently. It's not like, once in a lifetime. Women get their periods every 21 to 28 days. That's a lot of times. That's a lot of times. To not have one authentic hadith in this regard is really telling you that there wasn't something that was so at least known that everybody was so familiar with it. Okay, let's continue. So this was, inshallah, hopefully, inshallah, to clarify that point. And now we're going to go to the other segment of it. So you could see with this hadith and where the Prophet ﷺ, at least for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, so I just wanted to quote that one, and where he allowed Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to basically not have his entrance be closed off, was really just to give honor for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, but no one else was actually given that. Well, Ali ibn Abi Talib as well, but you could, at the end of the day, see that there are differences of opinions. Let's, I guess, summarize it really quick. So you had the first opinion was that this ayah right here was actually referring to a person in a state of janaba and also as a traveler that couldn't basically take a shower, so they would basically do tayammum. That was the first opinion. The second opinion is that no, they're in a state of janaba, but they're passing by basically to that they could actually make sure they could do wudu or do tayammum and pass by to get to because the masjid was like a main hallway. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ had actually closed all the other entrances that led to the masjid except the entrance of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So in other words, the masjid wasn't becoming a hallway anymore and had its sanctity, that it was a designated area as a masjid. All right, let's see. So therefore, let's say وهذا يدل على أن اللبث في المسجد للجنوب جائز إذا توضأ. So now let's say the final, I'm not going to go in all of these details, so I'm just here summarizing. He said, and this actually proves that staying in the masjid, even if a person is in a state of janaba, it is permissible if they were to do wudu. And he said, this is when you say madhab, the madhab would actually mean the choice, or at least the preponderant opinion that Ahmad and Ishaq is basically Ishaq ibn Rahowi or Rahoya, differences of opinions on how you pronounce his name. And he's actually one of the shuyukh of al-Bukhari, by the way. And then he said, basically, it's permissible to actually stay. And he said, فَالْجَوَابُ أَنَّ الْوُضُوء لَا يَرْفَعُ حَدَثَ الْجَنَابَةِ. Okay, what's going on? Okay. let's move on. I'm just trying to وإذا كان لا يجوز له اللبس فأحرى ألا يجوز له مس المصحف. So if you cannot right there, if you can't stay in the masjid, then definitely there are differences of opinions in regards to touching the Quran when in a state of janaba or even reading from the Quran, whether it is actually permissible or not. Why? Let's look at this. This is question 2. Can a woman during the state of period, can she actually read the Quran? Okay. The main reason for that, let's actually go Surah al-Waqi'ah, ayah number 79. Let's go to it. Remember, this is page 94. Let's remember page 94. We're going to go to Surah al-Waqi'ah, go up. Surah al-Waqi'ah, wow, low opened right on the spot right there. Let's just really quick, we're going to say, well, what are they really having differences of opinions on? Okay, let's see. This is the ayah right there. فلا أقسم بواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. Right here, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. Right here, this pronoun hat, this little pronoun hat, is what they actually had differences of opinions on what it's referring to. Remember, this is a pronoun. So in other words, when you look at the pronoun, whenever you would have a pronoun, you're going to go to the nearest noun, because that's what it would be referring to. Okay, if I were to say, here's the book, give it to me, what is the it referring to? Well, it's referring to the book because that was the nearest noun that I had mentioned. And that's the same thing. Now, let's look at this. Here the ayah says, إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ. It is the Quran that is basically sanctuary. فِي كِتَابٍ مَكْنُونٍ, in a sealed book, that it is not touched but al-mutahharun. Pay attention to this one. Those that said that this is referring to the Quran, they said, well, the nearest noun was actually Quran. And what about Kitab Maknoon? They said this one here is basically a description for the Quran. So they said, then therefore, the ayah says, none shall touch it, i.e. the Quran, except those that are in a state of tahara, al-mutahharun. Yet, this was the first opinion. The second opinion, they said, no. The word la yamassuhu, the pronoun who, is referring to al-kitab al-maknoon. They said, al-kitab al-maknoon, which means the sealed book. They said this is different than the Quran. Why? They said the sealed book is al-lawh al-mahfuz, which is basically the book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had scribed right in the heavens. And this is al-lawh al-mahfuz, and that means this is the pronoun ha is referring to lawh al-mahfuz, and therefore illa al-mutahharun is basically literally means except those that are in a state of purity. They said this is actually describing the angels. This is not describing human beings. Al-mutahharun to actually mean al-lawh al-mahfuz, and that the only ones that can have access to al-lawh al-mahfuz are basically al-mutahharun, which are the angels. So how are you going to say al-Quran al-Kareem? They said, well, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. This is talking about إنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم. They said إنه لقرآن كريم. Right there, this is basically talking about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the revelation, and that the words contained great, magnificent words, a magnificent reminder in the Quran, and that what is in the Quran is basically what you would find in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, in the sealed book, that no one will touch it except the angels. Now, you can say right there, both opinion. Let's see, what do you guys think? I know, this is not, hey, no, we're all students of ilm here, okay? But you could see, both opinions do actually make you think. It's like, what? Both opinions actually have strong points. I'm not really sure what to think. Well, in that situation, when you're not really, and of course, does that mean we can touch the Quran? Does that mean we can't touch the Quran? Does that mean, well, if you're talking about even touching, can a woman during her period actually read the Quran? All right. And then you go into all of that. Let's see. Well, wait a minute. If you're going to say that, hold on.
And that's why you said that when it has the English with it, that's not the Quran, right?
It's not. So
because it's added English words, so it's not actually the Quran.
Absolutely. Well, let's see this one. And he said, يمنع الجنوب عند علماء من قراءة القرآن غالبا. So here, of course, when he says ulama, now remember, al-Qurtubi is Maliki scholar, so he was talking about the Malikis, and he said that a person in a state of janaba should not be reading the Quran according to the madhab Maliki. He said, except very few ayat, such as للتعوذ, to basically, do a ruqya, to protect all of that. And the evidence that he quoted, he said, روى موسى بن عقبة عن نافع عن ابن عمر. All right, so this Musa ibn Uqba, that's not a very, you could see right there, this is not a long chain of narration, that the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, لا يقرأ الجنوب والحائض شيئا من القرآن. That, look at this, pay attention, because if this hadith is proven to be inauthentic, that's it. We're going to take it, even if it's one hadith, Noura. Pay attention to it, okay? He said, quote, that a person in a state of janaba and a woman basically in a state of a period, they don't read anything from the Quran. أخرجه ابن ماجه. Okay, well, here it is. The hadith has a source, but just because it says أخرجه ابن ماجه, that doesn't mean it's authentic. Let's go to footnote number 6. So here's the hadith number. Okay, and he said, well, there's also a reference in At-Tirmidhi as well. And he said, in even Ibn Adi, and Ibn Adi actually has, it's like in a 6-volume book. It's called the Du'afa wal-Majruhin. Okay, so the Du'afa, he was basically telling you, well, actually Ibn Adi had actually quoted that in volume number 1, page 294. But wait a minute, Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar, who's a scholar of hadith, we quoted him before. Hafiz ibn Hajar is a very, very important scholar. Remember Fath al-Bari, we said it was in almost 21 volumes, and 20 volumes, sometimes 24 volumes. But it's not that the book changes, the print changes. Sometimes they can make them big fonts and small fonts, and then that basically affects the number of volumes that you would have in it. And of course, Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar is one of the most important scholars, really, of hadith. Okay, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, where's Asqalan from? Where's Asqalan? Right close to Gaza. In Palestine, right close to Gaza. You can't beat that, right? Can't beat that. So he basically, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he basically had some details to be said about this. Well, let's see what he said. In Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he basically died 852 year Hijriya. So 1449, not to 2023, but 1449, but 852 Hijriya. So let's say, certainly he wasn't influenced by the West. Let's see what he said. He said, وهو من رواية إسماعيل بن عياش عن موسى بن عقبة وهي ضعيفة. He said that narration is basically upon Ismail ibn Ayyash, some narrator, and it on Ismail ibn Ayyash. If he were to narrate upon a guy named Musa ibn Uqba, he said they're actually weak narrations. And he said Ibn Abi Hatim had also mentioned, quote, in page number 1 in his Ilal, volume number 1, page 49, he said, in fact, it's basically min qawl ibn Umar, which basically means that this is not a hadith, but it's actually an athar. What's the difference? An athar is a quote upon the Sahabi. it's him saying it. But a hadith is a quote upon the Prophet. So let's see. Al-Hafidh in his book Talkhis al-Habir, and he basically said right there, وقال الحافظ في تلخيص الحبير لكن رواه الدارقطني. So here, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he said actually that hadith was actually narrated by Daraqutni, and Daraqutni, just an idea. Daraqutni, he put a whole compilation of hadith to test his students if they're capable. And look at this previous way of testing their students. They would compile a whole book of hadith and expect not a page or two or 5 or 10 pages. The exam is not a page or two. The exam is in a whole 4 and 6 volume book. That's the exam. So he did this exam, which is in 6 volume book, all right, and put
with no distractions of anything.
Exactly, exactly. You're gonna have this test, and this test was actually in 6 volumes, and where in it there were a hadith that are authentic and not authentic. And he said, let's see, he said, fihi mubham. He said, in that chain of narration, there's actually somebody that is anonymous. And he said, there's another chain of narration in where it is not authentic upon Musa. And he said, right there, that he said there was even a mistake, that it was صحح Ibn Sayyid al-Nas طريق المغيرة. Someone else, Ibn Sayyid al-Nas, he basically came in and wanted to correct the narration. He said, well, actually, there was a mistake in it, because there is Abdul Malik ibn Maslama. He said, in fact, that narration has another person. His name is Abdul Malik ibn Maslama, who's also not authentic. And he said, if this chain of narration didn't have this figure in it, Abdul Malik ibn Maslama, he said, then yeah, we would consider it as an authentic narration. So you could see right there, this hadith, and you saw all of that. These scholars of hadith, they don't play games. They don't speak of themselves.
Did you have to learn on a lot of narrators, a lot of these biographies of them?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm not specialized in hadith for the narrators, at least in each and every single one of these narrators, but definitely we would actually study takhrij, we would study hadith, we would study all of these different narrators, we would study about all of this, to kind of decipher, to be able to decipher what was being said in order to make sure that we're actually using the resources. So I'm just here, just giving you just a little bit Talkhis al-Habir and giving you Daraqutni and giving you all this information just to help you see what we're actually talking about, and that we're, in order to understand and go back to these resources, we don't just hadith daif, yeah, it's a weak hadith, and just move on. No, we go back to scholars. We go back to books that contained all these different biographies. So we don't just, yeah, it's a weak hadith because I don't want it to be hadith sahih. This is not playing games. These are great scholars of hadith right there that we would go back to. So let's say Ibn Abbas basically said, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, Rasulullah naha an yaqra ahaduna al-Quran wa huwa junub. Here's another hadith. Said, hey, I've got another hadith for you. Ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he said that the Prophet had forbid that any of us would read the Quran while they're in a state of janaba. Let's see. And what did he say? Let's see, hold on. Where are we here? Number 3. Where's number 3? Okay, let's see. أخرج ابن ماجه. And what was it? That لا يحجبه عن قراءة القرآن شيء إلا أن يكون جنوبا. Okay, is that what the hadith that we're talking about? Right. So basically, that there was nothing that would prevent the Prophet from reading Quran, except if he was in a state of janaba. Okay, so let's say, and he was like, well, we do have other chain of narrations, and he said that this is actually not sahih. Let's see right here. Al-Hafidh fi, again, Talkhis al-Habir. Talkhis al-Habir is it's not that big, by the way. Talkhis al-Habir, It's basically to go over الرافعي had a hadith sorry, a book of fiqh, and الحافظ الخبير التلخيص الحبير or الحافظ ibn Hajar, he basically goes over that book and basically does these commentaries and research for each and every single hadith. And he said right there, هذا الحديث ثلث رأس مال. And then he quoted al-hadith لا يثبتونه. He said this hadith, the scholars of hadith don't actually regard that as authentic. Let's see al-Khattabi, again, our friend who actually did work on Sunan Abu Dawood. He said كان أحمد يوهن هذا الحديث. He said Ahmad used to actually regard this hadith as weak. And in Nawawi, في الخلاصة, he basically said خالف الترمذي الأكثرون فضعفوا هذا الحديث. All right, so he said for Tirmidhi, when he regarded this hadith basically as authentic, he said he basically went against majority of what they said. Most scholars actually said that this hadith is not authentic. You see that? You know, when we speak of hadith and going into the resources, I know sometimes people are, it needs a lot of focus because they're not used to these books. They're not used to these names. They're like, okay, give me the summary of all of this and I believe you. I just want you to recognize the amount of work that they actually did, all right? When they want to regard and study, it's really important. It's so sad that when Islamic studies are taught, especially for women, it's taught like it's really at a kindergarten level, at a preschool level, at an elementary level, and they end up becoming an easy target for those that are changing the religion of Islam. Become an easy target. Let's see. حتى تغتسلوا. All right, now I think it was right here. We said it was page 94. This is what I remember. I'm right. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Let's see. Let's continue here. حتى تغتسلوا. You guys, we're just still in this. What time is it? 11:34. We've got till midnight. At least 11:34 a.m. my time. So we've got a couple hours. Good. حتى تغتسلوا. حتى تغتسلوا. So here he basically said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid that they would basically pray until they would do ightisal. What is ightisal? So ightisal, basically making a shower, and he said it's basically to describe something that we would know. What is it? Well, it's basically to let the water pass over the body, and in other words, flow over the body. Now, here's one thing. The scholars actually had differences of opinion. Is it enough to just sit under the shower, let the water just go run over the body and without doing any rubbing and scrubbing? Here, he said, well, according to the madhab Maliki, it's not enough to just sit under the shower and let the water just flow over your body. But in fact, according to Maliki, no, you actually have to rub and scrub your body. It's the soap or gotta get whatever, I don't know, sponge or whatever, and gotta scrub the body. Why? He said, because that's what makes showering. That's what makes ightisal. It isn't going to happen unless you actually rub and scrub. And he said, well, that also is the same for wudu. It's not enough to just have the water go over your hand or your body, but you actually have to rub and scrub the different parts. Is that what everybody agrees on? Well, let's first actually quote and see where they got that opinion from. All right. So they said, well, because the Prophet ﷺ actually said in a hadith, تحت كل شعرة جنابة. Under each and every single hair, there would actually be, in other words, it's kind of like stretching out, or at least under each and every single piece of hair, and in the root, I guess, under the hair follicle, considered that there would actually be a remaining of that janaba, which basically, in other words, it's some contamination. Then therefore, فَغْسِلُوا الشَّعْرَ. So wash the hair and make sure وَأَنْقُ الْبَشْرَ. أنقل البشرة. البشرة would actually mean that you would have to purify the skin. Okay, well, let's see. You got number 2. Let's go to the footnote and see. Footnote, let's see. Number 2, he said من حديث وفي إسناده الحارث بن وجيه oh no, this hadith is actually munkar, da'if. Let's see, this hadith is not actually authentic. Okay, so now you could see it. I put that for you. Let's see number three. Number three, he said with Tamheed. Tamheed is for Ibn Abd al-Barr. That's a huge book. It's so sad that we don't have that one translated. It's a huge book. It's an almost 18 volumes. Almost 18 volumes. It's a huge black book. It's Maliki book, Ibn Abd al-Barr. All right, so let's see. Even though this is the fatwa for the Malikis, but al-Qurtubi is not a fanatic Maliki. So he said, قلت لا حجة فيما استدل به من الحديث لوجهين. Maliki, al-Qurtubi, even though Maliki, he said, actually, there's actually no evidence to support what they had claimed, that you would have to rub and scrub your body from two different standpoints. Why? He said, well, number one is that when you, وَأَنْقُ الْبَشَرَ, he said, أَنْقُ الْبَشَرَ, this is when it says and purify the skin. He said that this is not the skin per se. He said al-bashara could also mean, could also refer to the private part. He said it simply means not to purify the skin, because al-bashara could also mean the private part. So he said that is referring to the private part and not necessarily that you have to purify and scrub and rub your skin. He said, as for the second hadith, which was basically this hadith right here, the second hadith, تحت كل شعرة, is that the hadith that he was referring to? Number two? Yes, that hadith right there. He said, as for that hadith, he said that hadith is weak. That hadith is weak. That's what he was saying. And that's why it's really important. I want you to look at that. So even though al-Qurtubi is Maliki, but not because he belongs to a certain madhab, doesn't mean he's going to adopt everything that the madhab had said. You see that? And let's see. And he said, but you could see, all right, that there was a hadith Sahih. It basically is saying that you don't have to scrub and rub your body when you want to do the shower. And he said our evidence that the Prophet ﷺ was actually a boy, basically urinated on him. And then the Prophet ﷺ basically just poured water and he didn't scrub and rub. And that hadith was actually narrated, let's say, by Muslim. Majority of the scholars, they said it is enough to just let the water pour over the body, and that's enough, even if you were to not scrub and rub the body. You could say right there, he was like, okay, well, let me quote that. Tamheed for Ibn
That's
Abd
talking about one in the bathroom?
Yeah, well, yeah, scrubbing and rubbing. You're taking a shower.
Okay.
And you know what? Let's do it differently. Okay. Let's say this person decided to go and actually, I don't know, dive in the water and come out. Does that suffice? According to this, yes. Let's say the person just put on the shower, just relaxed in under the shower without even scrubbing and rubbing. Is that enough?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying, without using soap.
Exactly, using soap and rubbing and all of that, you know. Let's say they they had a shower 10 minutes ago. All right, later on they needed to shower because of the janaba. They're like, well, I mean, it was just really removing the janaba. That's it. So they didn't want to scrub and rub and really boom, 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 scrub and rub. So they just wanted to let the water flow. Okay, I'm just making it short. I mean, you know, some people are lazy to actually scrub and rub, and other people, they're like, oh, I'm just laying it out there. I'm just laying it out there, really, because what's more important than the scrub and rub is really to recognize that when the scholars of fiqh, they take a hadith seriously and they go back to each and every single resource. I want you to recognize the amount of
effort and time.
Effort, time, care. They considered each and every single issue to them, even if it's this little tiny detail. To you, it's like, not a big deal. But to them, they were so concerned that they wanted to make sure that they took each and every single little detail from the words of the Prophet ﷺ, words that were proven to be inauthentic. They were concerned about really wanting to take Islam seriously, take Islam from its resources, and care about each and every single intricate detail and not blindly follow Islam. I want you
So
to
what you're saying is when you give us a fatwa, you want us to understand what's behind it and
Exactly.
the evidences, yeah,
Absolutely. I just
and
want
what
you,
scholars said and everything.
you know, what I really care about the most is that the Muslims would recognize the magnitude, the vastness of this ilm. And right now, what we're seeing is that we're seeing people that probably read a piece of book here and there about Islam, and then they're right there starting to give me fatwa and starting to give fatwa. It's like, come on, aib, to, you know, to not recognize all the effort that was actually put in by these great scholars and just simply, you know, just throw these words like, nah, this is not acceptable. It's like, hey, when you want to talk about these scholars, just mention at least their name and recognize who you're talking about and recognize that they put in magnificent effort to give you this. And you might think of it, oh, should I rub and scrub? Not a big deal. You just said not a big deal. Okay, fine. But look at the amount of each and every single resource that they went to just to get to this piece of information. Why? Because their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because their love for Islam, because their love to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because their love to follow the sunnah. They loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they wanted, if it means to search and do all the search to know what Islam says, they were willing to take it. They were willing to do whatever it takes to study. Ulum al-Sharia right now, the sciences of Sharia are right now abused by the Muslims themselves.
I think for over here, at least in the West, I think it's the lack of Arabic and just knowing Arabic.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, haram, sorry. Okay, I'm trying. Was I too fast? Okay.
A little bit.
A little, okay, a little bit. You guys can actually slow it down, you know, using that.
Just don't drink coffee. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. So let's see. We're just, you know, just gonna make it. You could see I'm just going over and over. There's a lot more. I'm just, you know, making the story short, despite all this that I did. Let's say. All right. And the evidence, of course, the other scholars that actually said that you could just let water flow. And he said, well, basically, you could say that the Arab would just say, just to have the water flow, that's enough. That's enough to actually say have the water flow, that's enough to actually say that's ghusl. Let's see Abu Umar. Abu Umar, another name for him, Ibn Abdul Bar. Sometimes he's called Abu Umar and sometimes they'll call him Ibn Abdul Bar. All right. And he was actually a scholar, a great scholar. So Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and even Ibn Abdul Bar, you know, he was the author of al-Istidkar. He was the author of a number of huge books, including al-Tamheed. He actually died 463 year Hijrah, and he wrote a book, al-Isti'ab fi Ma'rifat al-Ashab. He was Maliki madhab, all right? He was actually born in Qurtuba. Ya Allah, whenever I would see the scholars of Al-Andalus, it just makes me ache, all right? All right, he was also known as Hafid al-Maghrib. Anyhow, so Abu Umar, you could say that he was basically the person that they quoted, Istidkar, Tamheed, all of those are basically for Abu Umar / Ibn Abdul Bar. He said وغير نكير أن يكون الغسل في لسان العرب مرة بالعرك ومرة بالصب والإفاضة، وإذا كان هذا فلا يمتنع أن يكون الله عز وجل تعبد عباده في الوضوء بإمرار أيديهم على وجوههم مع الماء ويكون ذلك غسلا، وأن يفيضوا الماء على أنفسهم في غسل الجنابة والحيض ويكون ذلك غسلا موافقا للسنة غير خارج من اللغة. He said, we know that in لغة عربية that the word غسل, and even in لغة عربية, that sometimes the word غسل can mean to rub and scrub, and sometimes can also mean to just let the water flow. He said, and it can happen, and we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can actually ask us to worship him by, let's say doing a certain type of hygiene in where we could just let the water flow, and that would be called ghusl as well, or ghusl. And it could also be when the person is actually rubbing and scrubbing, and both can actually be considered as following the sunnah, and they're not contradicting the word in Lugha Arabiya, so therefore it would be just fine. And let's say, and of course, Hadith Maymuna Aysha يرد ما رواه شعبة. Well, let's get to, I'm just going to get to another topic right here. What time is it? 10 more minutes? 10 more minutes? Okay. Okay. I'm just going to, I guess now that we made that, in summary, what about the top, the part about for men, of course, in letting the water flow in between the different parts of the beard? Do they have to put in their fingers and let the fingers and the wetness go through the beard and all of that? That's a differences of opinions between scholars as well. But I'm just going to make the story short. Ibn Abd al-Hakam, he said, وَذَلِكَ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْنَا. It's best for us, that is the Malikis, to actually let the water flow in between of course, between the hairs, especially if we're talking about the beard, just so that you would make sure that it is including all the different parts of the body, right? Because you want to make sure that you include all the different parts of the body. Let's say, do we have to actually wash it? In other words, basically gargle and wash the mouth and even wash the nostrils? Because the ayah says, حَتَّى تَغْتَسِلُوا. Let's say, Abu Hanifa, he basically said, yes, you have to. That is obligatory to wash the mouth and wash the nostrils, even if you are basically washing for al-ghusl from janaba or even from the period. Abu Hanifa said you have to. Why? He said, well, because that is exactly like the cheeks and exactly like the forehead, and therefore if you were to leave any of that, you would basically have to redo all your ghusl. In other words, even if you were to pray, if you did not basically wash your mouth and gargle and wash your nostrils, even if you were to leave one little part, your salah is invalid, and you would
That would
have
be
to,
hard,
I know.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Hold on. Well, let's see what Malik says. The Malikis, they said, no, it's not actually obligatory, and not even for the washing, not for janaba, and not even for wudu. Why not? They said because that's an internal thing, that's an internal part of the body and not an external part of the body. And that was not only mentioned by Malik, but that was also mentioned by al-Tabari. Now, one thing, you see right there, Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari. Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, I know people would usually know, they would say, well, I know Abu Hanifa's madhab, Abu Hanifa, and I would know, they would say that Abu Hanifa, they would say Maliki, they would say Shafi'i, they would say Hanbali. But guess what? There are other
he had a madhab? Oh.
Ibn Jarir al-Tabari?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had his own madhab. Al-Layth ibn Sa'd, he had his own madhab. Al-Awza'i, he had his own madhab. So why don't we know anything about their madhab? Well, we know some of the things about their madhab. We don't really know all of their madhab, but they had their own madhab. Why weren't they known to us then? Why don't we have all the details like the other scholars? It was really because the students. So if you were to go for madhab Hanafi, It was really because really Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani was the main scholar that basically had documented the madhab al-Shafi'i, madhab al-Hanafi, sorry. And if it wasn't for Nawawi to document al-Madhab al-Shafi'i, we would have actually not known much about it. Al-Ramli, Shafi'i, well, of course, Nawawi and al-Ramli, you got some scholars. So the scholars that documented later those certain madhab are really what made the madhab really known. So Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, it's not that he didn't have a madhab. He did, but his students didn't do the job that Abu Hanifa's students had done to his.
Oh, okay. SubhanAllah.
Imam Malik, whether it's Sahnun or whether it's Asad ibn al-Furat or Abdul Rahman ibn al-Qasim, those were the main figures that documented Madhab Maliki. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal, later on, his son Abdullah, he was the one that documented that. And in fact, even Madhab Hanafi, so you've got al-Madhab al-Hanbali, sorry, you'll have differences of opinions on that Madhab Hanbali. Just for the Madhab Hanbali, you can have so many different narrations. At one point, Madhab Hanbali didn't even exist. There was no such thing as a Madhab Hanbali. And it wasn't until later on. And that's why you'll have scholars like al-Mardawi in almost a 12 volume. It's called al-Insaf fi Ma'rifat al-Rajah min al-Khilaf. In 12 volumes, he'll tell you, well, this is what Ibn Rajab had said, this is what al-Uqayli had said, and different scholars of al-Madhab al-Hanbali. But then even about Ahmad ibn Hanbal, you'll have so many different narrations on what his chosen madhab was. But at the end of the day, is that Al-Layth ibn Sa'd, it was actually mentioned that he was even more scholarly than Malik himself. He lived in Egypt. Al-Awza'i, he was actually from Lebanon. He was also mentioned as being as scholarly as Imam Malik himself. So you could see, these scholars were actually madhab themselves. And they too, they also said it wasn't obligatory to wash the mouth and the nostrils because they considered it as the internal part of the body. Let's see. Other scholars like Ibn Abi Layla. Well, Ibn Abi Layla and Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, they really go back to Abu Hanifa. I mean, they're considered like, within, let's call them the same neighborhood. They said it was obligatory. Why? Oh, there was also Ahmad ibn Hanbal as well. And even some of Ashab Dawood. Ashab Dawood actually means, the Zahiriyah. They also said, and Ata is basically Ata ibn Abi Rabah. He died 110 Hijriya, and he was a great scholar of Mecca. So they all said it is obligatory. Let's see. Did they actually go? Okay, so let's see. وَحُجَّةُ مَنْ لَمْ يُجِبْهُمَا. So their evidence of whoever said that it wasn't obligatory. They said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't even mention them in his book. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't obligate it, not even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet didn't obligate it in any hadith that is to wash the mouth and the nostrils. And he says, and therefore, since it wasn't mentioned, then therefore in Surah Al-Ma'idah, you can see let's go back, let's go to this ayah and actually see what this ayah says, right? This is page 94. I'm going to go back to Al-Ma'idah, ayah number 6, right? Hopefully we can find it really quick. Oh, wow, alhamdulillah, we found it. Okay, let's see, go to ayah number 6 and actually see what it says, right? I want you guys to see it. And this is it. Here we go. Ayah number 6. Let's see. So ayah number 6. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم. You who believe, if you stand for the prayer, so then wash your faces, your arms up until the elbows, and wipe your heads, and wash your legs or feet until the ankles. Okay? So they said, it doesn't mention of any face. It doesn't mention of any mouth and nose and the nostrils. They said it says wujuhakum, and the face is basically the outside part and not inside the nostrils, and the mouth, inside the mouth is not the face. The face is the outside. So they said, well, this is our evidence. Let's go back to the ayah. Now you see it. Okay, now you go back to that ayah. So they said, فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, and he said it didn't actually say mouth. So therefore, and then of course, those that had said it was obligatory, they said, well, yes, it says فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. And he said, we don't actually know a single hadith where the Prophet ﷺ voided or at least left out washing the mouth and the nostrils. We don't actually know anything of that. You could see right there. So how do we understand all of that? They said, well, those that responded to them, they said, well, wait a minute. No, it's a sunnah to wash the mouth and the nostrils, but not necessarily obligatory. Now, we'll stop right here. I know that was a lot of details. This was just a taste of fiqh. Just a taste, not bad, okay? Any questions before we end right here, inshallah? This was fun. This was really fun. Allah yahmiki ya Rabbi, Allah yahmiki ya Rabbi. I know we went in a lot of details, and some of it is probably unprecedented for some of you to actually go in such details in this hadith is narrated by this hadith is what, and some of you, are really new to this, but don't worry, I promise you, inshallah, in the intro to fiqh class, I'm going to let you see these books and actually get to have a personal relationship with these books, inshallah. Inshallah. You're going to have fun, inshallah. So this is it, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Unless you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, no questions. We'll see you all next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.